What if I told you there was a machine that could make people tell the absolute truth? Not a real lie detector, but a machine so convincing, so intimidating that people were just too scared to lie to it. Well, today, we're diving into a really strange and honestly a deeply controversial tool from the history of psychology that tried to do exactly that. It's called the Bogus Pipeline.
So, here's what we've got on tap. We're going to look at what this wild machine was and the problem it was actually built to solve. Then we'll break down the really compelling arguments both for and against it, and finally, we'll ask the big question: is this a dilemma that can ever really be solved?
All right, so let's start with the big idea. You have to go back to the early 1970s. Social psychologists were hitting a major wall. See, they needed to ask people about really sensitive stuff. Things like racial prejudice, drug use, sexual attitudes. The problem was, they knew deep down that people weren't always being straight with them. They needed a way to get past all those social filters. Basically, they needed a mind-reading machine. And since a real one was, impossible, they decided to just build a fake one.
And that right there brings us to the absolute core question of this whole explainer. It's a question that pits this relentless search for knowledge against our basic duties to each other. Is it ever okay to lie to someone in order to get them to tell you the truth?
So, to really get why this bizarre device even exists, we first have to talk about something called the social desirability problem. In a nutshell, it's our tendency as humans to give the right answer, the socially acceptable one, instead of what we actually think. And for researchers, this is a huge headache because it totally messes up their data and makes it incredibly hard to study what people really believe.
And this is where the bogus pipeline, or BPL for short, comes in. It's not really a machine, it's more like a whole procedure. It's this elaborate bluff where people get hooked up to what looks like a super sophisticated high-tech lie detector. But here's the kicker. It's all fake. The machine does absolutely nothing. Its only job is to convince you that the researcher can see right into your soul, so you might as well just fess up and be honest.
The way they pulled it off was pretty slick. First, they'd connect you to this impressive-looking contraption covered in dials and wires. Then came the calibration phase. This was the magic trick. The researcher would ask you questions they secretly already knew the answers to, maybe from a survey you filled out earlier. And like magic, the machine would correctly guess your answer, proving it could read your mind. Once you were totally convinced, that's when they'd hit you with the real, sensitive questions. The fear of getting busted by the machine became the pipeline to the truth.
Now, to really wrap your head around the debate over the BPL, you have to look at it through two classic ethical frameworks. On one side, you've got utilitarianism. This view basically judges an action by its results. If the outcome helps the most people, then the ends can justify the means. But on the other side, you have deontology. This framework says, nope, some things are just right or wrong based on rules and duties, and the consequences don't matter. For a deontologist, how you do something is just as important as what you get out of it.
Okay, so let's start by looking at the case for the bogus pipeline through that utilitarian lens. The argument is pretty straightforward. The good you get from truthful data on huge social issues might just outweigh the ethical price of a little deception.
And the people who support this make a really powerful point. They argue that researchers have a moral duty to find the most accurate information they possibly can. I mean, think about it. If we can't get honest data on something like teenage smoking, how can we create programs that actually work? From this point of view, a small, temporary deception of a few people is a price worth paying for knowledge that could save lives or fix major problems in society.
And this isn't just a theory. The BPL actually works. A huge analysis of dozens of studies found it has an average effect size of 0.40. Now, for those of us not in statistics, in social science, that's a really solid, meaningful result. It proves the BPL doesn't just work a little bit, it makes a significant, measurable difference in getting honest answers.
You can see just how powerful this was in a famous 1971 study on prejudice. When they used standard questionnaires, it looked like negative stereotypes about African Americans were starting to fade away. But when they hooked people up to the bogus pipeline, a totally different story emerged. Under the watchful eye of the machine, people admitted to holding those exact same old stereotypes. The prejudice hadn't vanished, it had just gone underground, because it was no longer socially acceptable to say out loud. The BPL exposed a really uncomfortable truth.
Okay, but there is a massive and really compelling counter-argument. From that other perspective, the deontological one, the benefits just don't matter. The focus is on the act itself, and the act here is lying. This view argues that some ethical lines are just fundamental, and you just don't cross them, no matter what kind of amazing knowledge you think you might find.
This quote really gets to the heart of it. Lying is wrong, period. Breaking someone's trust is wrong. It doesn't matter if you get better data from it.
The act itself is what's wrong because it undermines the dignity of the person in the study and, frankly, the integrity of the researcher. According to this view, you simply can't justify stomping on someone's rights just to collect information.
And this argument isn't just a vague feeling, it's about breaking some really specific core principles. First, veracity, the simple duty to tell the truth. It also violates autonomy, because how can someone give real, informed consent if you're actively lying to them about what's happening? It tramples on privacy by tricking people into revealing things they would have otherwise kept to themselves. And finally, it breaks fidelity, that unspoken promise between a researcher and a participant that they're going to be honest with each other.
Now, critics will argue that the bogus pipeline isn't your garden variety research deception, right? This isn't like telling someone you're studying taste preferences when you're actually studying their mood. Now, the deception here is way more active, way more invasive, and it carries some pretty unique risks that put it in a class all by itself.
In fact, there are 5 really big dangers. First, this is active lying, not just leaving out a few details. Second, it can feel like coercion. If you believe this machine can't be fooled, you might feel forced to admit to illegal things, basically incriminating yourself. Third, there's a real risk of psychological harm. Forcing someone to confront their own hidden racism or other biases can be deeply upsetting. Fourth, this thing was often used on minors, who legally can't give informed consent to this kind of invasive procedure. And finally, it kind of takes away a participant's right to withdraw. One simple way to back out of a study is to just give fake answers. The BPL is designed specifically to remove that option.
So, after hearing both sides of this, where in the world does that leave us? On one hand, you have a technique that we know works, a tool that can uncover really important truths, but it comes at an incredibly high ethical cost. This isn't just a simple disagreement, it is a fundamental collision of values. And really, it all boils down to 2 completely opposite starting points. The utilitarian view basically says, look, the BPL is a useful tool, we should use it, and the burden of proof is on the critics to show that the harms are definitely greater than the benefits. But the deontological view says, whoa, hold on, the BPL is fundamentally wrong. The burden of proof is on the researcher to show that using it is so absolutely critical that it overrides our basic ethical duties. So one defaults to yes unless, and the other defaults to no unless.
And here's what's so fascinating. More data, more science, it can't solve this for us. Science is great at showing us the consequences of our choices, but it can't tell us which values we should prioritize. This is a philosophical fight about what we're willing to pay for knowledge. So, we're going to leave you with this thought. There is no easy answer here. It is a genuine ethical dilemma that forces us to weigh one good thing against another. If you are the one wearing the lab coat and you are faced with a problem that this tool could solve, but only at the cost of deceiving someone who trusted you, where would you draw the line?